Hi, y'all, and welcome to the live stream tonight. What a day at the Lori Vallow Daybell triple murder trial. The prosecution rested after weeks of testimony, more than 60 witnesses. They finally rested, and the defense started its case. Dramatic witnesses, testimony that completely turned around what we all have been thinking about the case. It showed how Lori was completely exonerated, wasn't guilty at all. Nah, just kidding. Actually, what happened was nothing, a big nothing. The defense put up its entire case, not. It simply rested, no case at all. And we are going to talk about that decision and why the defense did that, what I think about it. I'm going to give you my inside scoop on what I think about that. Before the prosecution rested, we had final facts for the timeline. I'm going to show you those in the timeline. We also heard about the James and Elena love story. Now, up until now, I have been avoiding talking about what I think might be the cringiest Harlequin romance of all time. But we are getting into it, and we are going to talk about the James and Elena love story authored by Chad for Lori. It came in through, of all people, a tactical specialist with the FBI. They'd already talked about this at trial as well, Nicole Heidemann. And she talked about this story that Chad, who is an author, wrote and texted in pieces to Lori, in little bits and pieces over a day. And of course, Lori said she loved it. She loved this story. The prosecution wanted it in because they say this story paralleled the story of Lori and Chad. That James, the character who represented Chad, and Elena, the character who represented Lori, were real. It was just Chad telling their story. Although, frankly, I don't know how it helps the prosecution all that much. But we'll get into it. Even if you don't like Harlequin romances, especially extra cringing ones, you could still like this video. So please hit the like button on this video as we get started. We had already heard from Zulema, the friend of Lori's, that Lori and Chad had met at a conference. And Lori had helped Chad sell his books. He was both a publisher and an author, and she helped him sell his books, push them to people at the conference. And shocker, so did James and Elena. They met exactly that way, and Elena helped James push his books. And here, I'll just give you some quotes from it. We're not going to read the whole thing because it was fairly lengthy, like a little novella, I guess. So I'm just going to give you a few quotes from it so you can get, trust me, all you'll want to know about James and Elena and the story Chad wrote. He could only giggle when people asked if she was his wife because, yes, in fact, she was. She just didn't know it yet. And James was definitely having amorous feelings toward Elena as they sold books together. He had not felt this happy in his entire life. He was quite sure this was the woman, the voice he heard on the way to the conference, had told him about. James was ecstatic because he had already fallen deeply in love with her. Or better said, he remembered how much he already loved her. Now, the reason the prosecution, and there's more, trust me, I'll give you more, but this is relevant to in the prosecution's mind because both, well, I don't know about James and Elena, but Chad and Lori were both married to other people at the time that Chad wrote this. They were both married to other living people at the time that Chad wrote this. Now, of course, those spouses are dead. And in fact, it may have been just after Charles was killed. We have it on the timeline. I'll double check that. Oh, as we go through, we're going to hit that on the timeline too. Here's another quote from Chad. They looked deeply into each other's eyes for the first time, and he knew he was in the presence of a goddess. He resisted an impulse to kiss her, but his entire body was on fire. He instinctively knew she was everything he had dreamed of. The prosecution would say that's relevant because of the fact that Lori and Chad's unusual religious beliefs, they say in the indictment, led to their decision to justify and to convince other people to participate in the murders of Tylee, age 16, Lori's daughter, JJ, age 7, her son, and Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy. There will be separate charges against Lori for the death of her husband, Charles Vallow, but those are pending in a different state. That's not going to be with this case, which is Idaho only. So another quote, and it was discussing a thick veil between their souls. In other words, Chad believed in reincarnation, as did Lori, at least quickly she believed that. And Chad's story talks about the fact that up until they met, they didn't know that they had been married in prior lives. It was a thick veil between their souls, but it was pierced on this day, and we'll get into the quote, that would be remembered throughout the heavens as the true beginning of a spectacular mission that would save millions of souls and defeat the forces of darkness. So they see themselves as very important. So important, the prosecution says, that they decided to eliminate all of those pesky relatives. In fact, they call them obstacles, those relatives who were obstacles to their calling to greatness. It was very clear assuming that James and Elena are mirroring Chad and Lori, it's very clear that this was not a platonic relationship. This was not just something where they were hoping, that one day if something changed and they weren't married, they could get together. It was different. And here's this quote. Thankfully, she had worn 16 layers of clothing to survive the 80-degree weather, so he was not fully aware that she truly had the body of a goddess. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about. But that revelation would have to wait a month, not forever, not until they're divorced, but a month. He also stated it was made crystal clear to him that they had been married before and would be again. There was an obstacle at the time. Both of them were married to other people at the time, but that was not going to be an obstacle because he knew they would be married again. It was clear to him that they had lived prior lives, married then, and would be married again. He said they had been married before on this earth and other times on a previous earth. Their love truly spanned the universe and eons of time. They knew the Lord had brought them together again for a crucial mission that only they could accomplish as a united couple. And maybe I should take back saying it's like a Harlequin romance novel, because that may be doing a disservice to Harlequin romance novels. Chad talked about the fact, James and Elena talked on the phone every day, and James, according to a quote, he knew they had been married before and they had been close friends with the Savior, Jesus, when he lived in Jerusalem. James had served in an important position in the Lord's church, and Elena had been his beloved spouse and best friend. That relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime. That mirrors what Lori told some of her friends about the fact that she had been married to Chad in a prior life. They had been close to Jesus. In fact, later, Chad would say that he had been Jesus's brother. The story goes on. In Jerusalem, James and Elena had enjoyed tremendous intimacy. Their physical desire for each other was unmatched, and they were fortunate that they could be alone morning, noon, and night, and they seized every chance to passionately express their love to each other. They simply could never get enough, even after many years of marriage. Next quote, he also became aware that his spirit would visit her at night, and they would wrap around each other in a sensual embrace. And it was clear from the novel that, and it's available on the internet, it's not something that's brand new information, but it was brought into the trial in greater detail. It was clear that this was not just friendship, that this was something romantic, that they planned to get married through this. And I'm not going to go into detail, but we'll just a few phrases like loins tightly against, fit together, moaning, erotic, united in heavenly bliss, and Elena gripping the storm. I'm not even going to go there, although they did go there in court. They were sealed. Chad and Lori went to the temple on November 16th and 17th. And coincidentally, James and Elena, in his story, went to the temple where they were sealed. And according to Lori's story later, as she told her friends, they were sealed by the angel Moroni and Jesus himself in the temple. And Chad went on, or the novel went on to say, when James and Elena held hands, there was a powerful vibration that exceeded the celestial world. Now, there was no cross whatsoever in this. I'm not quite sure what they would have asked, but there was nothing. I felt like, you may recall that Chad's kids argued that he could not have dug a grave as poor as the ones that JJ and Tylee were buried in, because after all, he worked for a funeral home. He would know better than that. So I thought maybe they could have argued, well, he was an author. There's no way he could have written a novel that bad, but there was nothing like that. The final witness for the prosecution was Nicholas Edwards, Attorney General's investigator. And initially, the prosecution wanted to get in a lot of information through him. They wanted to use him as a summary to put together all of the evidence. They ended up not being able to do that because of objections from the defense to the exhibits that they wanted to use. They got in a few exhibits, and they were able to use something called demonstrative exhibits with the jury. Now, you may be wondering, what's the difference between demonstrative evidence and actual evidence, or demonstrative exhibit and actual evidence? The difference is, like, I'm going to show you a timeline in just a minute to go through what they said today. That's demonstrative. I'm just showing you. It's not evidence. I don't have evidence that about Chad or Lori or what they did or the murders, but this puts together the evidence that has been presented so you can understand it. And so demonstrative just demonstrates the point that the witness is making. So let's get into the timeline. And don't forget to stick around to the end, because I have some super exciting news that you are going to be very excited about. Okay, so we're going to get into what the prosecution said. Let me pull up my timeline so I can have that all ready to go. What the prosecution said that was new today. And what you'll see is everything that's red is something that either was new, or in one case, there's just one point I really wanted to emphasize to you. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about that, even though it came in yesterday. So remember back in November of 2018 is when Chad and Lori visited the Idaho Falls temple together. And Chad's love story suggests that that's the date for their sealing. Why does that matter? Because it's long before the death of Charles Vallow or the death of Tammy Daybell. So the prosecution would say that they were sealed to each other while married to other people who were living. This indicates that they had every plan of making sure they could be together no matter what it took. And the prosecution would say makes it more likely that the jury should believe they killed the spouses. In February of 2019, and I just hadn't put this in before, but we knew that Charles Vallow had initiated divorce proceedings against Lori, and that was in roughly February. They had pulled back from that. They weren't pushing it at about the time of his death, but that had been at least sitting out there. It was a possibility. Now, on the 14th of July, 2019, okay, and that is after Charles Vallow was shot. So 3 days after Alex Cox, Lori's brother, shot and killed her husband, Charles Vallow, 3 days afterwards is when Chad is sending Lori that James and Elena story, love story, and over multiple text messages. So that's, believe it or not, that's when he was sending it. And I want to say thank you to Akahop Cop. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let me look real quickly. I didn't miss anybody. Did I? Sorry. Okay. So that love story had clearly been baking for a long time, long before Charles Vallow was shot by Alex Cox. Now, Alex Cox at the time said this was self-defense. Lori said that, and Tylee said that. All three told the police it was self-defense. The majority of the new facts we got today related to the death of Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife at the time. So I wanted to point out this one more time for you because it's so important. On August 11th, 2019. Now, remember, at this point, Charles Vallow has been shot, but Tylee, JJ, and Tammy Daybell are all still living. And Chad texts to Lori, "We are surrounded by celestial relatives that are simply obstacles. I'm so sick of it." And Lori says, "Me too. What is it that you really want?" That is so critically important because it is the two of them describing relatives around them as obstacles. Soon, many of those relatives are going to be dead. Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, the triple murders at stake in this particular case, will all be dead within a little bit over 2 months. Then on the 3rd of September, Lori said, and I'm emphasizing this from yesterday too, she told her brother, "We are trying to get to the bottom of what we need to do to eliminate them completely." Eliminate was referring to zombies. Zombies were people who were possessed by evil spirits, and not coincidentally, all of Lori's and Chad's relatives who were obstacles have become possessed by evil spirits. So we'll then get into some of the new information. On the 4th of October, Chad texted Lori at 4:20 a.m. saying he was dreaming of caressing you in your bed. On the exact same day, Chad urged his wife to visit her family in Utah. They had moved to Idaho a few years before, and her family still lived in Utah. Then on the 9th of October, 5 days later, from 9:12 to 2:28 a.m. on the 10th, there are 90 phone calls between Alex Cox, brother of Lori, Chad, and Zulema, the friend of Lori's and Chad's. All of those phone calls took place in that brief period of time. I think it was like 17 hours. The reason that timing is so important is because in that period of time, someone wearing a mask is going to shoot at Tammy Daybell. At the time, Tammy told people on Facebook that someone had shot at her and told the police someone had shot at her with a paintball gun. She thought it was just a prank. Whoever it was did not hit her, did not kill her. She was going to die 10 days later, but not that day. Then there were also many texts between Alex and Chad that same day. Alex and Chad's phones were together in the afternoon. And then in the evening, Lori, Chad, and Alex exchanged many text messages. Chad texted Alex 6 times, including 4, I believe it was, between 8:28 and 9:29, which was right about the time when Tammy was being shot at by some strange person. She said that nothing came out of the gun, including, by the way, paint. So if it was a paintball gun, nothing came out. Homer J. Maximus in the same time frame, that is Alex's name that he, according to the prosecution, that he used to set up an email address. And he searched for things like how to clean a Grendel AR, which is a type of rifle or gun, and what a Grendel AR might do through a Dodge Dakota. In other words, if you shot into a Dodge Dakota, would it work? That was relevant because the Daybells owned a Dodge Dakota. Meanwhile, that same evening, Lori had gone to Missouri where she was doing a casting on Tammy with Zulema. We got testimony about that earlier in the trial, saying that Zulema was asked to work with Lori to try to cast an evil spirit named Viola out of Tammy. Meanwhile, somebody was trying to kill her. According to the prosecution's idea that it was a real shot, a real gun, and they think the person in the mask was Alex Cox. And it was no paintball gun, no fake. It was for real. Then that same day, there was a 38-minute phone call between Alex and Zulema. There have been a lot of questions about Zulema and her role. She testified at trial. She, as far as I know, is not being prosecuted. She may have some kind of agreement where she is not prosecuted, provided she testifies openly, honestly at trial. I don't know the details of whatever deal she may or may not have. Then on the 18th, this is probably the evening when Tammy Daybell dies. Chad reports it the next morning. Early in the morning, he calls 911, and he and his son call 911 and report that Tammy is dead and cold and stiff by then. But at the night before, the prosecution says she was just fine. She went to school, she worked. At 10:22 p.m., she's playing games on her phone. And then at 11:28, a JPEG was deleted from Tammy's phone. I have wondered, what on earth was that about? I have no idea. If you have an idea, stick it in the comments. I'm very curious. At 11:46, Alex, who was in the area, parked at a church nearby, left the parking lot of the LDS church that was near Chad. At 11:53, Alex called Lori. At 12:10, Lori texts Zulema, and at 12:35, Chad texts Lori. So there's a lot of communication here right around the time when Chad and Tammy would be going to bed. Sometime around here or before the next morning, Tammy Daybell dies. The prosecution says she was asphyxiated. Their implication has been that it was by Chad and maybe Alex. They haven't placed Lori there. She wasn't there, in fact. She was not present at the time. She was in Hawaii. That's her alibi. But remember, she's being prosecuted not directly for murder, not like smothering Tammy with a pillow. She's being prosecuted for conspiring to kill Tammy. So on the 19th, that same day, now, the 19th is the time when Chad called 911 and said, my wife is dead, early in the morning. That day, Lori texts Chad and says, I am missing you more. I need you desperately. I can't wait. This is the day his wife died, supposedly of natural causes, much to his great surprise. And Chad says to Lori, need you to hold me tight. That would be great. So those were the new pieces of information that we got throughout the trial today. Let me flip back to my my notes so we can keep talking about what else happened at the trial. At this point, the witness had two more points. The first was, here, let me pull out of that so we can see each other again. At that point, the witness also pointed out that Chad had actually received money from Tammy Daybell's 2 life insurance policies, not a new fact, and described the gruesome and oppressive scene when JJ's body was found, wrapped in a black bag. The FBI lead agent cut a hole and exposed the brown hair. So he sort of left the jury with that reminder of what had happened in real terms to JJ, to Tylee, and of course, also to Tammy. Now, the cross-examination was focused on Tammy being shot at and said, well, there were a lot of text messages around the time of her death, but that could have been about anything, right? You don't know what it's about. And the witness had to say, yes, that's true. I don't know what they were talking about. And also, the defense wanted to point out that an AR is not a paintball gun, and the defense contends they look pretty different, that no one would mistake an AR for a paintball gun. The prosecution has put in several witnesses who said, yeah, they look kind of similar. The defense also talked about the fact, as they have in the past, that law enforcement did not look seriously at other suspects for that paintball incident, paintball/AR/shooting incident. Tammy herself thought it could have been a bipolar neighbor child, but That was never followed up on, and they never talked to him. They instead, within a matter of days or a month, concluded that it was most likely Lori, Chad, Alex, that it was something connected to all of the other things that they were finding, like JJ and Tylee being missing at the time. And then we got into lawyer wars. There were because the prosecution was about to rest. There was a battle over changing the indictment 2 years after the indictment was entered. And all of a sudden, the prosecution said, there's a mistake that we need to fix. And thank you, Bobby Cat. I appreciate that. The judge was not happy with the fact that the prosecution wanted to change this at the last minute in the middle of trial. And he said, you could have done this before. You didn't have to do it while the jury's waiting for us out there. This could have easily been done before. I'm going to explain as quickly as I can what the dispute was about. I think it was ultimately not anything that really made a big difference. So let's first go to what the indictment said. Okay. It was mostly a matter of numbering. Do you see how in the count, the description, the words say grand theft by deception? And they say that in the words. I highlighted it several times, but you see how, and it is kind of small, but the numbers talk about this provision 4A. That was the wrong number. If it was very difficult to understand this from the reports, because remember, this isn't televised. It was difficult to understand this. This is what I think it was about. I think they should have used a different number there. This wasn't the only time it happened. I'll show you as we go through another grand theft by deception, and again, the number 4A is used. And you may wonder, what is this grand theft? What does that have to do with the triple murder? Well, it has to do with the benefits that were received by Lori Vallow after the deaths of JJ and Tylee. So they were missing, but Lori continued to collect their benefits. And I felt like one of the text messages made it pretty clear she knew that they were dead. Did it make it clear she participated? Maybe not, but it certainly, that particular text message made it clear she knew earlier. Actually, it wasn't a text. It was her conversation with Summer Shiflett when it was a jail call between Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett, and Lori. And it was something she said. I did a whole video on that, so you can go back and listen to that if you want. So that's why that matters. So let's take a look. So the prosecution says, okay, let's remember that this is theft by deception. That's what the words say. But that 4A provision is grand theft with intent to deprive. That's a different section from grand theft by deception. So they should have used a different numbering. It should have said grand theft. If it was indeed about grand theft by deception, which I think was accurate, then they should have used a different number. That's what it was about. It's not, I don't think, a huge deal or anything likely to result in overturning the verdict, but it was another mistake by the prosecution, and they made a number of them. And in fact, the death penalty is off the table because of the fact that they had made so many and produced information at the last minute right before trial. So at that point, the court said, no, I'm going to allow this. I'm going to allow the change of the indictment to have the correct number. It says the right words. I'm going to match up the number and the words, and I'm going to allow that. And the state rested. The state said, okay, that's it. That's all our witnesses. I think it was 61. It was a ton of witnesses. And the defense made the usual motion you would expect the defense to make at that stage, called in Idaho a motion for judgment of acquittal. It under Idaho Rule 29, which I'll show you. And that just says before you submit the case to the jury, after the prosecution closes its evidence, the court on defendant's motion or on its own must enter a judgment of acquittal of any offense for which the evidence is insufficient to sustain a conviction. In other words, the defense says, Judge, we want you to look at the evidence for each count because we think the evidence is insufficient to sustain a conviction. And in that case, the judge has to rule that there's an acquittal on that count. Now, there is a 0 chance of that succeeding. First of all, in general, let me take that out of the stream. Okay. There's no chance of that in general, but there's really, really not a chance of that happening in this case because there has been a great deal of evidence. The jury could decide not to buy it, but there has been a lot of evidence. So that's just not a winner argument. Now, the judge has taken it under consideration. There may be a count here or a count there, perhaps the grand theft. I don't know. Perhaps there's something he'll rule out, but I think it's very, very, underline some varies, unlikely that that will happen. And I want to say thank you to Jan Cooner. Thank you very much. So at this stage, then, the defense took 15 minutes to confer with Lori, everybody outside the courtroom, standing there waiting, and the lawyers talked to their clients, nobody else present in the courtroom, and they came back with a very unusual decision, no defense at all, by which I mean they said, we don't believe the state has proven its case, so the defense rests. That's it. There were no experts, not even any witnesses, none at all, no witnesses at all. Lori did not testify. Would I have liked her to? You bet. Not only would it have been absolutely fascinating, but I would like explanations. I think the world would like explanations. But as I said, when we talked about the Summer Shiflett, the sister of Lori, call, just absolutely, she really could not. Summer's not an attorney, but she asked the questions we all have, and Lori could not answer them. It looked terrible. It made things worse for her. So there were also, and since that time, we've had brutal text messages that make it very difficult for her to make the argument that the defense has been trying to make since the beginning of the trial about whether or not this was really all Chad's fault, because we had too many comments from Lori where she said things like, how long do we have to wait? Should I be doing something now? I mean, could we just move this along? And then after that, of course, multiple people ended up dead. And so those pieces of evidence made it super difficult for Lori's team to put her on the stand. I just don't think it would have even been possible. So it was a wise choice. There was nothing really left that she could say, but there were no witnesses at all. Now, I said I spent a very short defense, but yeah, in keeping with the rest of the trial where there have been virtually very, very few questions at all on cross-examination by the defense. But I am still very disappointed with that. Is it the worst defense ever? And I would say that was the question I asked on the thumbnail. And no, definitely not the worst defense ever. For one thing, you can always put the wrong witness on or make a mistake and make things worse during your case. But also, this defense team got the death penalty taken off the table. That was an absolutely enormous win by the defense. It was strategic. It was done legally. They pressed for it for years. Lori, I think, likely would have gotten the death penalty if they had not done that. Chad still could get that. The death penalty is still on the table for him. But I still was very disappointed with the decision to put no witnesses on. I want to say from the beginning, it's very easy to throw stones when you're not the lawyer. They're trying to figure out how on earth to handle this case. It's real easy to just say, oh, they should have this, they should have that. Super easy, Monday morning quarterbacking. But this is a triple murder case. And our system does depend on someone being on both sides to argue the case. That's what our system depends on. So at the same time, though, I will say this. I racked my brain. Okay, what would I have done? Who would I have put on the stand to try to talk about this? You truly can't tell that without steeping yourself in the case, because there's a lot of just sitting there with all the evidence and trying to think of all of the ways that you might push back or the arguments you might make. But in this case, I will say their options were limited. There could have been experts who would have talked about time of death and things like that that might have helped Lori with alibis. But the friends and family were not an option. She might have included friends and family who would say, for example, that she was a good mom. But those witnesses already testified. They testified for the prosecution. They did admit that she was a good mom, except for that technical killing the kids thing that the prosecution says she did. But they said, other than that, she used to be a good mom, really different, really changed. But those witnesses were terrible for her. And they pretty much used up the friends and family. So that may be why. Now, what's left? I think I maybe missed. Oh, thank you, Pretty Pearls. I appreciate that. So what is left? Tomorrow we have a jury instructions conference, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if there weren't some motions about what's going to be in or out, closing argument, that kind of thing. Closing arguments are Thursday morning. And I have huge news for you. This is really big. The court is going to actually broadcast the verdict itself on the court channel. So we will go live when the jury comes back with its verdict. You will not miss that. So you definitely want to hit subscribe so that you get the notification when I go live when we're about to get the verdict. And tomorrow night, I am going to be doing what I think might be the most important live of the entire trial. I'm going to be unpacking the entire timeline. I'm going to be starting at the beginning and going through and just talking to you about what have we learned about the case? What is the evidence that we've seen in the case so far as we get ready for the closing arguments that are going to be taking place on Thursday morning? I doubt the judge will give them a tremendous amount of time, and I imagine the jury will begin its deliberations by Thursday afternoon. That I don't think it would take all day, and then there will be the charge from the judge, and then we will at that point be waiting to see what the jury decides in the case. I would not think it would be a super long deliberation, but you never know. You never know. And so we will be on jury verdict watch from that moment on. So I want to say, be sure to hit that like button. I would appreciate that. And subscribe. We are getting super near 100,000. I cannot even tell you how much I appreciate all of you subscribing and coming and watching this. It has been amazing to share all of this, the Murdaugh trial, Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, to share all of that with you. It is really an honor, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So see you tomorrow night.